I never told my son, Daniel, the truth about who I really was. To him, I was just an ordinary woman, someone who lived in a modest apartment on the quiet side of Seattle, worked in some nameless office, came home tired, and cooked whatever was left in the fridge. Nothing glamorous, nothing special, and that was exactly how I wanted it. For years, I let him believe his mother was simple, maybe even poor. Because if one day everything was stripped away, the car, the house, the career, I wanted to know if my son would still love me for who I am, not for what I had. But that illusion would end sooner than I expected. That afternoon, while I was sitting at my small kitchen table reviewing quarterly investment returns for one of the subsidiaries in Germany, my phone buzzed. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I smiled at first, then frowned. My son rarely called during work hours unless something was wrong. "Hi, Mom." His voice trembled slightly. "I need to ask you a favor." I leaned back in my chair, sensing the hesitation already blooming between the lines. "Go on, sweetheart." "Well, Isabel's parents are flying in from London this week. It's their first time visiting the States. We're having dinner Saturday night. They'd love to meet you." There was something in the way he said "love to meet you" that felt off more like an obligation than excitement. "That sounds lovely," I said softly. "But why do you sound nervous?" Silence. Then finally, his voice, quieter now. "I might have told them you're just a clerical worker. You know, an office employee. I didn't want to overcomplicate things. Isabel's parents are traditional. I thought it'd be easier that way." I froze. A strange chill ran through me. "You didn't want to overcomplicate things?" "Mom, it's not like that," he hurried. "I just didn't want them to make wrong assumptions. You know how they can be. I just didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. He said it like I was something to hide. After 35 years of raising him alone, working 16-hour days, building an empire in silence, now I was an embarrassment. I could have shouted. I could have hung up. But instead, I said calmly, "All right, Daniel, I'll be there." He exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Mom. The place is called La Belle Maison, downtown." Of course it was. I knew the restaurant well, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and prices that could feed an entire family for a month. When the call ended, I sat there quietly, staring at the walls of my small living room. It looked simple, plain, just as he described. But behind one of those walls was a reinforced safe containing my true life, a collection of investment portfolios, executive contracts, and retirement plans worth millions. I smiled, a bitter smile that tasted of old wounds. If Daniel wanted the world to see his mother as poor, then so be it. I would show him exactly what poverty looked like, and I would watch carefully to see who dared to look down on it. That night, I made my decision. I would go to dinner, not as Lucinda Hale, Regional Finance Director of Aurora Global, but as Lucinda, the unremarkable mother with nothing to her name. Saturday evening arrived cold and silver under the city's lights. I opened my wardrobe and brushed past my tailored suits, my silk blouses, and my designer heels, the armor of the woman I had built from nothing. But tonight, that woman would disappear. I reached for a faded beige dress, slightly wrinkled at the sleeves. Worn-out shoes, no jewelry, no watch. I tied my hair back into a loose ponytail and stared at the mirror. For a long moment, I didn't see Lucinda Hale. I saw a stranger, an exhausted, middle-aged woman, forgotten by life. Perfect. Before leaving, I opened my laptop to send one last email to my Singapore division about a merger clause. At the bottom of the message, my signature glimmered in bold letters. Lucinda Hale, Regional Finance Director, Aurora Global. I stared at it for a few seconds, then shut the laptop. When the taxi arrived, rain had started to fall. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror as I gave him the address. "That's a fancy place," he said with a grin. "I know," I replied softly. The drive downtown felt like descending into another world. The glittering towers, the couples stepping out of limousines, the red carpets rolled across marble floors. I wondered how many of them had ever truly known hunger, exhaustion, or loneliness. Probably none. The car stopped in front of La Belle Maison. Golden light spilled from the windows. A doorman in white gloves opened the door and bowed slightly. "Good evening, ma'am. May I help you?" "I'm here for the Worthington reservation." "Right this way." I stepped inside. The air smelled of truffle oil and champagne. Conversations hummed in polished accents. Then I saw them. Daniel, in a dark suit, hair neatly combed, standing beside Isabel, graceful, immaculate, her posture screaming refinement. And across from them sat Victoria and Charles Worthington, Isabel's parents. They looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine, he, in a tailored gray suit, she in emerald silk, every movement precise and cold. The moment Victoria saw me, her eyes flickered. She smiled tight, calculated, assessing me like a property appraisal. "Mom!" Daniel called, half rising. His smile was strained, polite, desperate. I smiled back, pretending not to notice the tension. "Hello, dear." Isabel leaned in for a quick, mechanical kiss. "It's wonderful to see you, Mrs. Hale." "Likewise, sweetheart." Victoria extended a jeweled hand. "So nice to finally meet you. Isabel has told us so much." "Only good things, I hope," I replied, my tone light but steady. "Oh, of course," she said, her eyes sweeping my dress, my shoes, my canvas bag. "You must be very proud of your son." I sat down at the end of the table, the farthest seat, of course. No one pulled the chair for me. When the menus arrived, I pretended to struggle with the French. Victoria smiled thinly. "Would you like me to help? The menu can be complicated." "Yes, please," I said softly. "I'm not used to these things." "Then something simple," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want to go overboard." Her words hung in the air like perfume gone sour. I smiled faintly. "Thank you. You're very kind." But inside, I was already watching, studying every gesture, every smug tilt of her chin. Because I knew what this dinner really was. It wasn't about family, it was a test. And soon, they'd learn that I didn't fail tests. I graded them. That night, I walked into La Belle Maison, pretending to be poor. I didn't know I'd walk out as something far more dangerous, truth itself, wearing a quiet smile. Dinner had barely begun when the quiet tension began to suffocate the air around the table. The waiter poured wine into crystal glasses, and the Worthingtons didn't even glance his way. Their gestures were fluid, practiced the kind of elegance that came not from breeding, but from years of pretending they were better than everyone else. I kept my eyes lowered, hands folded neatly in my lap. My dress looked dull compared to Victoria's sequined emerald gown. Even the napkin in her hand probably cost more than my entire outfit. She turned to me with the kind of smile that could cut glass. "So, Mrs. Hale, Isabel mentioned you work in an office?" I nodded timidly, playing the part to perfection. "Yes, a small administrative position. I do filing, paperwork, small things." "How admirable," Victoria said, her tone sugary but venomous. "It's rare these days to find someone content with simplicity." Charles chuckled, his voice deep and patronizing. "Simplicity is noble, as long as it's not forced." They both laughed softly. Daniel looked down. Isabel sipped her wine, pretending not to hear. I smiled faintly. "Yes, I suppose so." They continued, their conversation effortlessly gliding into the language of wealth brands, properties, investments, vacations. Each story was a performance designed to establish dominance. Victoria boasted about their villa in Tuscany, the art auction they attended in Paris, and how their daughter had been raised to appreciate refinement. At one point, she tilted her glass toward Isabel and said, "My husband and I always believed that environment shapes values. We wanted Isabel to marry someone ambitious, someone from a stable background." Her eyes slid toward me. A deliberate pause. I felt the sting beneath her words. "Of course," I murmured, pretending to miss the insult. "That's every parent's wish." But Daniel shifted in his seat, his knuckles tightening around his fork. He was hearing what I was hearing, the subtle dissection of his mother, performed in public under the guise of polite conversation. Victoria took another sip of wine, then added casually, "When Isabel told us Daniel's mother was humble, we thought that was lovely. So many people chase status these days. It's refreshing to meet someone who knows her place." Her words landed like shards of glass. I wanted to laugh, not out of anger, but disbelief. If only she knew how many times I'd stood across mahogany tables negotiating million-dollar contracts, while men twice her husband's intelligence waited for my signature. But not tonight. Tonight, she'd get exactly what she wanted, a meek, naive woman sitting across from her, nodding in gratitude. I smiled politely. "You're right, Mrs. Worthington. Everyone has their place. Oh, please, she said, pretending modesty. Call me Victoria. The waiter arrived with our entrees plates so tiny they looked like art exhibits. Victoria delicately cut her steak into perfect squares. This is Wagyu, she said proudly. $80 a serving, but truly worth every cent. When you've tasted real quality, you just can't go back. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. I'm sure it's delicious. I usually buy whatever's on sale at the grocery store. Her smile widened. Oh, of course. We all start somewhere. Charles nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. Hard work and humility. It's what builds character. I wanted to say, no, it's what rich people romanticize to make poverty sound poetic. But I didn't. I just smiled again and dabbed my lips with the napkin. After a while, the conversation turned toward Daniel. So, Victoria said, Daniel tells us he still helps you financially. That's wonderful. I blinked, pretending confusion. Helps me? She smiled gently. He's such a good son, always worried about your well-being. We told him he shouldn't feel burdened. After all, he has his own family to think about now. Daniel's jaw clenched. Mother doesn't need. Victoria lifted a manicured hand. Please, darling, I was speaking to your mother. Her voice softened again, like silk hiding a knife. Mrs. Hale, we've been discussing something. Charles and I thought, perhaps we could help you. Just a little monthly support, so you don't feel pressure to rely on Daniel. Say, $700, just enough for your comfort. There it was the bribe. A neatly packaged insult wrapped in pity. For a moment, I said nothing. I only looked at her, the confidence in her eyes, the satisfaction of someone who believed she had done a noble deed. Then I lowered my gaze. That's very generous, Victoria. Truly. She smiled, triumphant. We just want what's best for everyone. Peace, stability, respect. Respect. That word again. Spoken by someone who had no idea what it meant. The table fell into silence for a few moments, save for the quiet clinking of cutlery. Daniel shifted, Isabel's face flushed with discomfort. I could almost hear their thoughts. End this dinner, please. But I wasn't ready to end it. Not yet. Because tonight wasn't just about survival. It was about revelation. May I ask something, Victoria? I said calmly. Of course. You mentioned you helped Daniel and Isabel with their house? Oh yes, she said proudly. We contributed $40,000 for the down payment, and of course, $15,000 for their honeymoon in Europe. $55,000, I repeated softly. She nodded, glowing with pride. When you love your children, you don't count the cost. I looked her straight in the eye, still smiling. You're right, but tell me, did that $55,000 buy you love, or just obedience? The words hit her like a slap. The air froze. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Isabel's breath caught. Victoria's smile faltered. Excuse me? I leaned forward slightly. You keep talking about investments, properties, money spent, but you've never once asked me who I am, what I've been through, what makes me happy. To you, people are worth exactly what's written on their receipts. Charles frowned. Now, hold on. No, I interrupted softly. You hold on, because I've listened to your monologues all night, and I think it's time you listen to mine. Victoria's hand stiffened around her wineglass. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, she looked unsure. You offered me $700 to disappear. You called it kindness. I call it arrogance. But don't worry, Victoria. I smiled slowly. You're about to learn exactly how expensive humility can be. For a moment, no one breathed. The flickering candlelight between us seemed to stretch and tremble, casting long, uneasy shadows across the table. Victoria sat frozen, her fork suspended midair, lips parted but wordless. Charles looked between us, trying to decide whether to defend his wife or stay silent. Daniel was pale. Isabel's eyes glistened, not with anger, but something else, fear, maybe, because she knew something was about to break. I set my napkin down carefully. You see, Victoria, I began quietly, you made one mistake tonight. You assumed that quiet meant weakness, that simplicity meant inferiority. But the thing about silent people, I leaned forward just a little, is that they're usually the ones who already know the truth. Victoria blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing her perfect composure. What truth are you referring to? I tilted my head. The truth that money doesn't buy manners, or class, or integrity. Charles gave a dry laugh, trying to recover the atmosphere. Mrs. Hale, you seem upset. Perhaps we should move on. I turned to him calmly. I'm not upset, Mr. Worthington. I'm just clarifying the terms of this little transaction your wife proposed. Transaction? Victoria repeated, her tone sharp now. Yes, I said, my voice unwavering. $700 a month, in exchange for my silence, for my distance, for the comfort of your pride. Her painted lips twitched. You're twisting my words. No, I said evenly. I'm unmasking them. I leaned back in my chair. The waiter approached, sensing tension, but I waved him away gently. We'll call you when we're ready. Then I looked back at Victoria. You wanted honesty? Let's have it. Her smile tightened, but she didn't stop me. I worked all my life, I said, each word deliberate. Started as a temp secretary in a company so small it didn't even have air conditioning. I was 23, pregnant, and abandoned. No family, no husband, just a typewriter and bills. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. I had never told him that. I learned to survive, to work harder than anyone else. I studied at night, learned accounting by reading used textbooks and watching free lectures online. I built myself inch by inch into someone no one could step on again. I smiled faintly. And eventually, I became the regional finance director of Aurora Global. You know that company, don't you, Charles? Charles frowned, recognition dawning. Aurora Global. Yes, of course. A massive firm. Massive indeed, I said. 5 countries under my division. I signed contracts worth more in an hour than you've spent on real estate this year. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Daniel's fork slipped from his hand. Isabel gasped softly. Victoria tried to laugh, a brittle sound that cracked halfway through. That's impossible. If that were true, Daniel would know. He doesn't, I said simply, because I never told him. Her brow furrowed. And why not? Because, I said, I didn't raise a boy to measure love in dollars. I wanted him to value decency, not wealth. To be a man of his own making. I turned toward my son then. His face had gone pale. Mom, he whispered, you make $40,000 a month? Yes, I said softly, and have for nearly 20 years. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Isabel reached for his hand. Victoria sat rigid, disbelief etched into every line of her face. Well, she said at last, her voice tight. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. It must be liberating to finally reveal your little secret. Liberating? I smiled. No, Victoria, this isn't liberation. It's a reminder. A reminder of what? She asked. That the woman you pitied tonight could buy this entire restaurant if she wanted to. But she doesn't need to because she already owns something you can't purchase. Her voice faltered. And what's that supposed to be? Grace, I said softly. Self, control, and a soul that isn't for sale. Her cheeks flushed crimson. You think you're better than us? No, I replied, steady. I think you've spent your life trying to convince yourself you are. The table fell into stunned silence. Even the background chatter of other diners seemed to fade away. I reached into my faded canvas bag and pulled out my black corporate card. I set it gently on the table beside her wine glass. Here, I said. Pay for dinner with this. A small gesture from a poor woman who apparently needed your help. Victoria's eyes darted to the engraved silver letters Lucinda Hale, Executive Access. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't reach for it. Charles coughed, forcing a smile. There's no need for this drama. Drama? I echoed, smiling thinly. You think this is drama, Mr. Worthington? No, this is justice. Polite, quiet justice. Victoria's composure cracked. Her chin quivered. You deceived us, she hissed. You lied. You pretended to be poor just to humiliate us. I met her gaze squarely. No, I pretended to be poor to see if you'd treat me like a person. And you failed, Victoria. Spectacularly. Her breath caught. You can't speak to me like that. I just did. Charles muttered something under his breath, but I ignored him. Across the table, Isabel's eyes filled with tears. Daniel sat completely still, his expression torn between shame and awe. I looked at my son, my voice softening. Now you see why I never told you, Daniel. Because I wanted to know whether you'd respect a woman who owned nothing, whether you'd love me without pride attached. He swallowed hard. Mom, I'm sorry. You don't have to be, I said. You just needed to see. Then I turned back to Victoria one last time. You said earlier that you admire women who struggle alone. Tell me, have you ever struggled for anything that didn't come wrapped in privilege? She stiffened. I built my life with my husband. No, I cut in. You decorated it. He built it. You merely hosted the dinner parties. Her mouth fell open. Charles shifted uncomfortably. I created my life from ashes, Victoria. I didn't inherit it, I didn't marry it, and I sure as hell didn't buy it. I earned it, every cent, every scar, every sleepless night. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping softly against the marble floor. You wanted to know your daughter's mother-in-law? I leaned closer, my voice barely above a whisper. Now you do. The restaurant had gone quiet. Eyes turned toward us, whispers forming like wind. But I didn't care. I picked up my canvas bag, left the black card on the table, and smiled. Dinner's on me, I said. Consider it a parting gift from poverty. Then I walked away, each step echoing louder than their silence. Outside the restaurant, the night was cold and mercilessly quiet. But inside La Belle Maison, you could have heard a pin drop. Every whisper in the room had stilled. The string quartet in the corner continued playing softly, unaware that at our table, a war had already begun. Victoria's face had hardened into marble. Charles shifted in his chair, clearly wishing the floor would open up and swallow him. Daniel sat motionless, his expression torn between shame and awe, and Isabel's eyes were glistening with restrained tears. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calm in my tone did the cutting for me. Do you know what's funny, Victoria? I asked gently. You spent the whole evening measuring people's worth by what they own. Yet the only thing you've shown me tonight is what you lack. Her lips trembled. You humiliated us in front of everyone. No, I replied quietly. You did that the moment you mistook kindness for weakness. The waiter arrived, uncertain, holding a dessert tray. Charles waved him away with a curt motion. We'll handle the bill later, he muttered. His voice cracked slightly at the word bill. I looked at Victoria. Would you like to handle it now? I'm sure your card will go through. Her eyes flashed. Of course it will. She reached for her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a gleaming gold credit card. She placed it in the folder and handed it to the waiter, with a glare meant to reassert control. The waiter disappeared. Silence filled the air again, heavy, electric, suffocating. A few tables away, someone laughed too loudly. It sounded almost cruel in the stillness between us. Daniel rubbed his forehead, whispering, Mom, maybe we should just leave. Before he could finish, the waiter returned, looking nervous. I'm so sorry, ma'am, he said softly. Your card was declined. It was almost poetic. What? Victoria's voice snapped like a whip. That's impossible. Try again. He did. The second time took longer. When he returned, his tone was almost apologetic. I'm afraid it didn't go through, ma'am. Color drained from her face. There must be a mistake. Call your manager. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and smiled faintly. Don't worry, Victoria. Happens to the best of us. Maybe the bank didn't approve of your generosity tonight. Her husband glared at me. This isn't funny. On the contrary, I said softly. It's perfect timing. I reached into my bag and pulled out another card, a metallic, translucent one that caught the candlelight like a shard of ice. The waiter's eyes widened slightly. Of course, ma'am. 2 minutes later, he was back. All settled. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. Victoria's head turned sharply. What kind of card was that? Centurion, I said, sipping my water. Invitation only. Minimum annual spend of $250,000. Her mouth fell open. I set the glass down and smiled. Would you like me to explain the rewards program? It's quite generous. Daniel pressed his hand to his mouth, hiding what might have been a stunned laugh. Isabel wiped at her eyes, this time not from embarrassment, but from something closer to admiration. Victoria pushed her chair back. You think this makes you superior? No, I said simply. It just makes me honest. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. She shot back. You pretended to be poor. I did, I admitted. To see how you would treat someone who had nothing. You failed the test, Victoria. Not because you didn't know who I was, but because you didn't care who I was. Her husband tried to intervene again. "This is unnecessary." I cut him off, my voice steady. "What's unnecessary, Mr. Worthington, is the arrogance that thinks money can buy decency. It can't. It only amplifies who you already are." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Victoria looked around the restaurant, realizing people were watching now, polite diners pretending not to stare. Her pride, her armor, her entire performance was cracking in real time. She whispered hoarsely, "You've made an enemy tonight, Mrs. Hale." I smiled, calm and deliberate. "No, I've made a point." I stood up, collected my bag, and looked at my son. "Daniel, I'll wait for you outside." He nodded mutely. Isabel reached for my hand as I passed. "Mrs. Hale," she said softly, "I'm sorry." I squeezed her fingers gently. "You have nothing to apologize for, my dear. Just learn from what you saw tonight." Then I turned to Victoria one last time. "You once said you speak 4 languages, I murmured. "Tell me, what language do you use when you say kindness? Because I've never heard it from you." Her face flushed scarlet. She couldn't find the words. I didn't wait for her to. As I walked out, the cold night air hit my face like a blessing. The noise of the restaurant faded behind me, replaced by the hum of the city. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped pretending. The air outside felt sharper than usual, that kind of crisp Seattle night where you can see your breath. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension dissolve with every wisp of vapor. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, broken into hundreds of tiny golden fragments. For the first time in a long while, I felt the rare stillness that follows after truth. But truth always comes with an echo. Behind me, the restaurant doors burst open. "Mom, wait!" Daniel's voice, urgent, desperate. I turned. He ran toward me, breathless, his tie slightly loosened, his eyes shining with guilt. "Mom," he said again, catching his breath. "What the hell just happened in there?" I studied him for a moment. The boy who once cried over scraped knees now stood in front of me, a grown man, torn between 2 worlds, the one that raised him and the one that judged him. "What happened," I said softly, "is that I stopped lying." He looked down, ashamed. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted everyone to get along. I didn't think—" "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't think. You assumed. You assumed that because I live simply, I must be small. That I couldn't possibly stand in the same room as the Worthingtons without embarrassing you." His lips parted, but he didn't argue, because he knew I was right. "I didn't mean to make you feel lesser, Mom," he whispered. "I just wanted things to go smoothly." I smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "You can't make things go smoothly by erasing the truth, Daniel. You can only delay the explosion." He rubbed his forehead, sighing deeply. "You're right. I'm sorry. I was stupid." I shook my head. "No. You were just naive. That's what love does to us. It blinds us to arrogance, especially when it comes dressed as sophistication." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of cars passing by filled the silence. Then he said something that broke me a little. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom? About your job, about your life, about everything." I looked at him carefully. "Because you didn't need to know. I wanted you to earn your confidence, not inherit it. I wanted you to become a good man, not a rich one." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I feel like I don't even know you." "You do," I said quietly. "You just met the part I've been hiding, the part that stopped begging for approval a long time ago." He nodded slowly, then exhaled. "They were horrible to you. I should have said something." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have. But now you've seen who they really are." He looked back toward the restaurant. "What do I even do now?" "You decide," I said. "You decide what kind of husband you want to be, what kind of son. Because money and class aren't the same thing, Daniel. Never have been." His expression softened. "I'll talk to Isabel. I'll make it right." I smiled, finally letting the warmth return to my tone. "Good. She seems like a good woman just lost in the wrong family." At that, the restaurant doors opened again. Isabel stepped outside, hugging her arms against the cold. Her mascara was smudged, but her eyes were different, softer, human. "Mrs. Hale," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything," I said. Yes, I do, she insisted. You gave me a mirror tonight. I saw myself in the way my parents treated you, and I hated what I saw. I nodded slowly. Then you're already changing. She wiped her tears. My parents. They're furious. They think you humiliated them. Did I? I asked gently. No, she said after a moment. You just told the truth. I looked up at the night sky, the clouds drifting slowly past the moon. Truth has a way of embarrassing those who hide behind lies. Daniel reached for Isabel's hand. She didn't pull away. Go home, I told them. Talk, really talk. Set your boundaries before they destroy you. Daniel squeezed my hand. Will you be okay? I smiled. I've been okay for a very long time. Tonight didn't hurt me, Daniel. It healed me. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. I love you, Mom. I know, I said softly. Now go and prove it. They walked away, arm in arm, leaving me standing under the soft glow of a street lamp. The taxi I had ordered earlier pulled up beside me. The driver rolled down his window. Evening, ma'am. Where to? Fremont, I said, getting in. As the car pulled away, the city lights blurred through the window. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Rough night? I smiled faintly. You could say that, he chuckled. You look like someone who finally said what needed to be said. I looked out the window again. Yes, I whispered. That's exactly what happened. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The cab hummed softly as we drove through the sleeping city. Neon signs blurred into watercolor streaks on the windows, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without performing. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and worn hands, glanced at me through the mirror. Rough night, huh? I smiled faintly. You could say that. He chuckled. You look calm, though. Most people who come out of that restaurant look either drunk or angry. You look lighter. I stared out at the rain-slicked streets. I told the truth tonight, I said. And sometimes, telling the truth feels like cutting chains. He nodded thoughtfully. That's rare these days. Most folks keep their mouths shut and their heads down. Not me, I said softly. Not anymore. We drove in silence for a while. The sound of tires on wet asphalt was oddly soothing. Then the driver spoke again. You don't look like the type who loses arguments. Whatever happened in there, you did the right thing. I laughed quietly. Maybe. Or maybe I just finally stopped pretending to be small. When we reached my neighborhood, I paid him and stepped out into the cold air. My building was old but clean, standing quietly among younger, shinier towers. I climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator habit. I liked the feeling of earning every floor. Inside, the apartment greeted me with its familiar simplicity. The beige couch, the bookshelves, the quiet hum of the heater. Nothing glamorous, but everything was mine. I hung my coat, poured myself a cup of tea, and sank into the sofa. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the steam curling above the cup. Then, my phone buzzed. Daniel. Mom. Are you home? Me. Yes. Safe and warm. Daniel. I can't stop thinking about everything. About you. About what I let them say. I smiled sadly at the screen. Me. It's okay, sweetheart. You needed to see it. Sometimes people only understand truth after they watch it burn. There was a pause before the next message arrived. Daniel. I'm proud of you. More than ever. I love you, Mom. Me. I love you too, Daniel. Get some sleep. I set the phone aside, my heart both heavy and strangely light. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, catching the edges of my picture frames. My life suddenly felt sharper, clearer. There was no going back. 3 days passed before I heard from Isabel. It was Wednesday afternoon, and the soft knock on my door startled me. When I opened it, there she was without makeup, her hair tied loosely, wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater. Mrs. Hale, she said quietly. May I come in? I gestured toward the sofa. Of course. She sat, her hands trembling slightly. For a while, she said nothing. Then her voice broke the silence, fragile but sincere. I came to apologize, not just for my parents, but for myself. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. I saw everything that night, every word my mother said, every time she tried to humiliate you, and I stayed silent because I was raised to believe silence was elegance. Her voice cracked. But I understand now, it's cowardice. I nodded slowly. It takes courage to admit that. She took a deep breath. My parents weren't always like that. They grew up poor, really poor. Dirt floors, no electricity, nothing. Money became their god because it made them feel safe. They passed that fear on to me, and I never questioned it until you made me. Her eyes filled with tears. That night, when you told my mother she didn't know Grace, I felt something shift. You were right. We've been so obsessed with appearing perfect, we forgot how to be decent. I set my cup down. Trauma has strange ways of surviving, Isabel. Your parents built walls with money. You have the power to stop rebuilding them. She nodded, her voice trembling. I want to. I told Daniel last night that I don't want their help anymore. Not the house, not the monthly transfers, nothing. I'd rather start from zero than keep living in debt to their pride. A faint smile touched my lips. Good. That's the first real wealth you'll ever have, freedom. She wiped her tears and looked up. Can you teach me how to be like you? How to live without needing to prove anything? I hesitated. I can't teach you that, Isabel. You learn it when life strips away everything you think defines you. But I can tell you this peace isn't found in money or appearances. It's found in knowing you don't need either. She nodded again, as if memorizing every word. Thank you for everything. When she left, the apartment felt lighter, as if she'd taken the last remnants of that poisoned evening with her. I stood by the window, watching her walk down the street. The city was glowing under a pale sun, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled, not the polite kind, not the professional kind, but the quiet, private smile of someone who had finally made peace with herself. 2 more days passed, and life began to settle into a strange, serene rhythm. I went back to my work at Aurora Global, not the pretending, not the small version of myself I'd shown my son, but the full, unhidden me. When I entered the glass office tower downtown that Friday morning, my assistant, Mariah, greeted me with her usual cheerful energy. Morning, Miss Hale. The Tokyo call is at 9. The Zurich meeting rescheduled to 2, and the CFO wants to discuss your Q4 projections. I smiled faintly. Good. Let's show them what restraint looks like in numbers. It felt liberating to be back in my natural element. No masks, no hiding. Yet deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted. Power no longer felt like armor. It felt like balance, like truth. But truth doesn't stay hidden for long. By noon, Daniel called. Mom, he said softly. We did it. Did what? Isabel and I moved out of her parents' house. We found a small apartment near Green Lake. Nothing fancy, but it's ours. Pride swelled in my chest. That's the best thing you've ever said to me. He laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard in months. You were right. It's strange once you stop depending on people who control you. You start breathing differently. Yes, I said quietly. Freedom always has a new smell. It's called oxygen. He chuckled. Then his voice softened. They're furious, Mom. Victoria sent Isabel a long message this morning full of guilt and threats. She said we're ungrateful, that we're betraying family. That's how manipulators talk when they lose their grip. I said calmly. Ignore it. There was a pause. Mom, I don't think I've ever understood you until this week. That's because you never saw me without the mask, I replied. Now you do, and I hope you'll wear yours a little less, too. We talked for a while about his plans, about Isabel starting therapy, about life. For once, it felt like we were equals, not mother and son, but 2 adults finally speaking from the same truth. That Sunday, Isabel came again, this time with Daniel. They looked different, simpler, more grounded. Isabel had a quiet glow in her eyes. We wanted to thank you, she said, setting down a small box of pastries. For everything. For breaking something that needed to be broken. I poured tea for all 3 of us. You broke it yourselves. I just struck the match. Daniel grinned. A dramatic one, as always. We laughed, but there was weight behind it, the kind of laughter that comes only after surviving a storm. Have you heard from your parents? I asked Isabel. She hesitated. My father sent an email. He said they'll give us space for now, which is code for silent punishment. Let them, I said. Sometimes silence is the first step toward humility. She nodded slowly. Do you think they'll ever change? I sighed. Maybe. People like your mother. They build entire personalities out of fear. It takes a long time to unlearn that kind of survival. There was another pause, and then Isabel reached across the table, touching my hand gently. "I want to be different," she said. "When Daniel and I have children someday, I want them to grow up knowing that value doesn't live in a price tag." My throat tightened, but I managed to smile. "Then you already are different." We sat together for hours that afternoon, drinking tea, sharing small stories, laughing over things that didn't matter. For the first time, our connection wasn't forced by obligation or status. It was real. When they finally left, Isabel hugged me tightly. "You taught me what grace looks like," she whispered. "Not the kind that comes from money, but from peace." And I realized then that I had passed something on something greater than wealth, greater than legacy. Not power, not pride, but dignity. Later that evening, I stood by the window, watching the sun melt behind the skyline. My reflection in the glass looked older, wiser, lighter. The phone buzzed again, a new message. "Unknown number. Victoria Worthington. You've caused enough damage. I hope you're proud of yourself." I stared at the words for a moment, then typed back slowly. "Me. More than you'll ever understand. Sometimes damage is just another word for growth." I hit send, set the phone aside, and smiled. The next morning, the world felt strangely still, like the quiet after a long storm when everything broken has settled where it belongs. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, scrolling through unread emails, contracts, reports, projections. The usual clutter of a high-paying life lived in silence. But beneath the neat lines of text, there was a sense of finality. I had spent years chasing numbers, and now, for the first time, those numbers finally meant nothing. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. The caller ID read Charles Worthington. For a moment, I debated ignoring it. But curiosity, or maybe closure, won. "Mr. Worthington," I greeted evenly. He hesitated, his voice low and unsure. "Mrs. Hale, I wasn't sure you'd answer. I usually don't, unless there's something worth hearing." There was a small, embarrassed laugh on the other end. "Touché." Then silence. Long, heavy silence. "Finally," he said, "Victoria hasn't been herself since that night. She's furious, yes, but also shaken. She's been questioning things I never thought she would." "You hit a nerve, I suppose." "I told the truth," I said simply. "That's all." "I know," he admitted, "and I think she knows it too. She just doesn't know how to live with it yet." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window. "Some people need to lose everything before they understand what they already have." "Yes," he murmured, "maybe she's getting close." He paused again, then continued, his tone gentler. "I wanted to thank you. You may have broken something, Mrs. Hale, but maybe it needed to be broken." I didn't respond right away. Gratitude from a man like Charles felt foreign, like finding warmth in a cold stone. But there was sincerity in his voice, and that mattered. "Take care of her, Charles," I said softly. "Money can't keep people together. Kindness can." "I'll try," he replied. "And Mrs. Hale, I hope someday you'll forgive us." "I already have," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean invitation." He gave a sad laugh. "Fair enough." Then the line went dead. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the park near Green Lake. The trees were shedding the last of their autumn leaves, each one a small flicker of gold drifting toward the earth. Children were running along the paths, chasing each other through puddles. A couple sat nearby feeding pigeons, their laughter soft and familiar. I sat on a bench, watching, listening, and it struck me. All around me were people who had far less than the Worthingtons, and yet they were richer in ways that could never be measured. A woman sitting at the next bench smiled at me. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, returning the smile. "Beautiful and honest." She nodded. "Honest. I like that word." She pulled a small bag of breadcrumbs from her tote and scattered them to the pigeons. "I come here every Sunday. Reminds me that all the little things we ignore are what make life peaceful." I smiled. "That's very true." She looked at me closely, with eyes so kind they seemed to read something in my soul. "You look like someone who finally let go of a heavy secret." I let out a small, breathy laugh. "You could say that. And does it feel better now?" "Yes," I whispered. "It feels like breathing clean air after years underground." The woman chuckled softly. "Good. Don't go back underground. Life's too short to hide." Something about her voice, the calm certainty of it, settled in my chest like a prayer. We sat there for a long time, feeding birds, watching the lake shimmer in the late Sunday. There were no big revelations, no dramatic endings, just peace, real, earned peace. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window again. The skyline glittered like scattered jewels. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably pacing through her mansion, clutching her pride like a wounded child. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Because I finally understood that I had never been poor, not a single day in my life. She had. She had wealth without warmth, status without soul, and that was the worst kind of poverty. I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it to the window, and whispered softly to the night, "To the ones who hide behind gold, may they someday find grace." My phone buzzed once more, a message from Isabel. "Isabel, Mom, we made dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread. It's the happiest meal we've ever had." Me, that's how you know it's real. Love never needs luxury, it only needs honesty. I set the phone down and exhaled. The weight I'd carried for years of secrecy, of silence, of pretending had finally lifted. And in that quiet moment, I realized something simple, but absolute. The richest thing I owned was peace. Days turned into weeks, and with every sunrise, the sharpness of that dinner night softened, but it never disappeared. It became something else, a quiet reminder that dignity, once reclaimed, doesn't need to be proven again. I went back to my routines. Early mornings, black coffee, crisp suits, the hum of boardrooms filled with polite competition. But inside, I was changed. Not hardened, cleansed. Every decision I made at work now carried a different weight. I began mentoring younger women in the company, those who reminded me of myself 20 years ago, walking in with trembling confidence and a heart full of hunger. One afternoon, my assistant Mariah stopped by my office. "Miss Hale," she said, "there's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Victoria Worthington." For a heartbeat, the world stilled. "Send her in," I said evenly. When Victoria entered, she was almost unrecognizable. Gone were the diamonds, the posture of superiority, the unearned confidence. She looked smaller, humbled, like someone who had finally been introduced to herself. "Mrs. Hale," she began, her voice thin, her eyes wary. "I didn't come to fight." "I assumed not," I said, gesturing toward the chair opposite mine. "Please, sit." She did, folding her hands in her lap. There was a long silence before she finally spoke again. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "That night, I was cruel. I've been cruel for a long time, and I don't even know why anymore." I leaned back, studying her. "Cruelty is often just fear in expensive clothing." She gave a soft, broken laugh. "You might be right." She paused, her eyes glistening. "After that night, something changed. My son stopped visiting. Isabel barely speaks to me. I thought I could control everything with money, but now all I have is silence. Empty rooms, empty pride." Her voice trembled. "How did you do it, Mrs. Hale? How did you build so much and still stay kind?" For the first time, I saw her not as an enemy, but as a woman who had never learned peace. "I wasn't always kind," I said, "but I learned that kindness is strength when it comes from choice, not weakness. I built everything by losing things first, my comfort, my illusions, sometimes even my dignity. But I never let bitterness replace grace." She nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can undo who I've been." I looked at her gently. "You can start by stopping. Stop measuring yourself against others. Stop confusing wealth for worth. Stop hiding behind your last name." Tears filled her eyes. "Isabel told me you forgave me." "I did," I said softly. "But forgiveness isn't a door back in. It's a window to see yourself clearly." Victoria took a deep, shuddering breath. "I understand." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "You said something that night I can't stop thinking about that real power observes. I think I finally understand what you meant." "Good," I said. "Observation is where humility begins." She nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale, for humiliating me and for saving me." I didn't smile, but my tone softened. "I didn't save you, Victoria. You're just finally saving yourself." She left quietly, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and for the first time, I didn't feel satisfaction, only peace. Even the proud can learn, I thought. Even the rich can awaken. That evening, as I walked home through the city's golden twilight, I passed a bakery window. Inside, Daniel and Isabel were laughing, their faces lit with something pure. They hadn't noticed me. I didn't interrupt. I simply stood for a moment, watching. And in that small reflection, through glass and dusk, I saw everything I'd ever wanted. A son who had learned integrity, a daughter-in-law who had learned humility, and a world that, for once, felt balanced. I smiled and walked on. At home, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the sky bleed from gold to indigo. The city lights flickered alive, one by one small reminders that even in darkness, there is beauty. My phone vibrated once more. A new message from Isabel. Isabel, dinner next Sunday? We'd love to have you. Daniel's making his famous roast chicken, and my parents might come too. Don't worry, no drama this time. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. Me. Of course, growth deserves witnesses. I set the phone down, leaned back, and closed my eyes. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Inside, peace had a home again, because after a lifetime of pretending to be small, I had finally learned what true wealth meant. Not silence, not survival, but the courage to stand, speak, and live without disguise.